Hello everybody, Jake your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, it's Monday. On Mondays we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays we wear pink.
Nice wig, Janice. What's it made of?
Your mom's chest hair.
Realizing I haven't drank any water today. Let's take a look at our tier list here for Season 14 of Pokemon Unite. We have buffs, we have nerfs, we have sklurfs. Couldn't think of a third word, went with sklurfs. Regret it immensely, but here we are, our tiers for the week. God tier, we only have one Pokemon that we're going to put in our God tier. We're not friggin' Norse around here. We have our S tier. These Pokemon are unbelievably good in the current meta. A+, these are Pokemon that I think are really, really solid and sort of stand above the rest of the roster. They're just not so broken that I put them into S. We have our A tier, extremely good picks. We have our B+ tier. Little annoying that we have a B+ tier, but this is a tier for Pokemon that I think are just above average, and in general I think a lot of the meta is doing really well. We have the B tier. Ugh. Hate that. Still got the B tier. More upset at the B tier than when I said Skluffs earlier. We have our C tier for weirdos. I'll talk about that a little later. We have our D tier, our Decidueye Memorial tier, a tier named after Decidueye because when Decidueye released, it was so bad, it had its own tier. And then we have our what tier? Let's get into it right away with our God tier. There's no question, I'm not going to try to trick you or anything like that. Mewtwo is the most broken Pokemon inside the game. Maybe one of the most broken releases ever. Probably. It's right there with Zacian and Comfey. Mewtwo Blissey is unbelievably busted, and things really aren't changing anytime soon. I hope we're going to see some more nerfs for this Pokemon, especially with things coming out like Blaziken. By the Wayziken, we do have Blaziken on this tier list later in the video as sort of a guess as to where I think this Pokemon is going to release. I played it a decent amount on the public test server, but you never know exactly what kind of power level something's going to come out at, so it's just going to be my best guess as to where this Pokemon places. Our first Pokemon going into our what tier is Mewtwo X. I don't really know what to say about Mewtwo X and Mewtwo Y. Well, I know what to say about Mewtwo Y. Mewtwo Y, but Mewtwo X is very, very weird because it's really good. It's a very, very strong Pokemon. It's probably an S tier Pokemon, but having Mewtwo X on your team means you cannot have Mewtwo Y. So having this really, really great Pokemon negates your team from having the most broken Pokemon in the game on it, and it just puts it into this weird zone of like if I needed to place its power level, it's probably here, maybe here after the recent nerfs because it's been nerfed more than Y, but it's like right here, right? Either S or A+. It's probably still broken S tier, but again, it literally limits your team from not having Y, which is the most broken. I don't even know what you do when you have a Pokemon. It would be like if you picked Mamoswine, you couldn't have Lapras or something like that, and you would just go, well, then why would I ever pick Mamoswine? It's just very confusing, so I have to put it into our what tier. There will be other Pokemon in our what tier, and you'll see why exactly I'm putting them in our what tier, but for now, I have to start our tier list like this. Mewtwo Y, completely broken, and then Mewtwo X, what? All right, let's move on to our speedsters right here. We have a lot of great speedsters and one that got a really nice buff. Let's start off with a really powerful one, Leafeon. I think Leafeon's one of the most powerful speedsters inside the game. One of the best early secures. You can actually fight against Pokemon like Mewtwo Y with it. You've got a bit of a delete button, and Y is squishy enough for you to delete it with that Unite move. I think it's very, very good inside the game. We've got a Pokemon like Talon. Talon's fine. It's B+ or B. It's somewhere in this realm right here. It's not bad. It's also not amazing. The fact that it has Fly does put it into sort of another category because you could kind of say it's maybe closer to B tier, but Fly always makes things pretty good for Talonflame. It can avoid tons of damage, and it can secure pretty good objectives with it. I think Talon's fine. I still think Talon probably needs a buff, but it's a speedster. It's in a weird spot. Another one in kind of a weird spot is Zeraora, who I actually think I would put higher on this tier list if it just wasn't for the fact that the Mewtwo's just dominate this thing. It feels like Mewtwo X, like Zeraora, like wants to jump in on it. Mewtwo X is very happy with that. And then Mewtwo Y can just play around it really, really well. There may be an argument that Zera is a little higher on this tier list. It did get some nice buffs a little while back, but I just think Zera doesn't really crush it in this meta. Sadly enough, right before Mewtwo X, I would probably say this thing is A or maybe even A+. But into these two Pokemon, I don't think it does particularly well. Let's see. Absol. Absol's going to be my first Pokemon I'm putting into our D tier. Consistently low win rate. Has been for a while. Doesn't fare well into the meta at all. Doesn't play well into tanky Pokemon like Lapras or Umbreon that well. Doesn't play that well at all into the Mewtwo's. I just think Absol is sort of the speedster that's been left behind. There used to be another one, and that was Gengar, but Gengar recently got some buffs, and I'm moving Gengar up to our B+ tier. It actually could be a little better than this. It could be slightly worse, maybe into our B tier, but this is actually a really nice time for Gengar. It got some buffs. The buffs felt kind of small, you know, when you look at them, but actually playing Gengar, I think they've made this Pokemon much tankier in an interesting way. I feel like I survive a lot better when I'm playing Gengar, and overall, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Gengar's win rate shoot up because of some of these changes. Dodrio, really good. Dodrio is really good. It's countered by every single thing in the game, especially the Mewtwo's, but it's still a really good Pokemon. And I also think Zoroark is extremely good. It's either A or A+. Zoroark and Leafeon both have sort of a win rate issue, but I think it's just because sometimes it's hard to carry with these Pokemon by yourself. And all of these Pokemon, all the speedsters, take a very high level of skill to be good with, and I think that's why these Pokemon's win rates kind of waffle a little bit. And sometimes they're high, sometimes they're kind of low. In general, high skill Pokemon that do very well. If I had to delineate these, it would maybe look a little more like this. I'm using delineate again, where I think maybe Zoroark could be a bit lower, but at the same time, against the right team comp, Dodrio is just in such a horrible position that he would drop down 8 tiers. So it all depends, but that's about where I see the speedsters in the game. Really, the only one that's just super unfortunate right now is Absol. All right, let's talk all-rounders right here, and I'm going to put Zacian here into our A+ tier. I could be wrong. It could still be an S tier Pokemon. Zacian is extremely good. I think this recent nerf, bug, whatever it is, I have a couple videos on my channel about this where Zacian now needs to charge Intrepid Sword. I think it's actually a pretty big difference maker in some of these fights. Don't get me wrong, this is still an incredibly powerful Pokemon, but this is actually a pretty big nerf to Zacian, especially I just started picking it up last season. I didn't play it at all when it was kind of like busted. I played it for like a day, and then I thought, I can't touch this thing, it's too dumb. And then I started picking it up a little bit last season, having fun with its play style, and now this change I honestly think is a bit of a nerf. I'm still saying this thing is great, but it feels like maybe this could hurt it more than people might expect. What's another fun all-rounder to talk about here? Okay, let's talk about Zarina. Zarina's been in our Decidueye Memorial tier for a while, and I'm also going to bring Zarina up to our B+ tier here with Gengar. Might be a little bit higher, actually. I'm seeing a lot of Zarinas inside of games. I think these buffs were very much needed because this Pokemon is just... it was hurting so bad. It got a lot of different buffs, so I actually think it could be slightly higher than this, but it just got buffed. I want to give it a little more time to settle into the meta before I know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think a really positive change for it. And I would say the same thing for Aegislash. Aegislash has kind of always been in this weird realm, but I like all of these changes. I like Gengar, Zarina, Aegislash has got this buff and then a buff a couple patches ago too. It feels like they're all in a pretty stable spot right now, which I really love to see. Let's see, another all-rounder to talk about. Lucario. I think Lucario is doing really well. Buffed a little while back. Always been a good Pokemon. Solid A choice. It's not going to set the world on fire, but if you have skill with Lucario, you can do really well inside of a game. I think another Pokemon hanging out in the A tier right now is Tyranitar. Tyranitar got some good buffs for its battle pass. Can't wait to unlock that battle pass. It got some good buffs for its battle pass, and ever since then, I've been playing it a decent amount inside of games, and I feel like The extra Unite move that you get off inside of the game, basically, the lower Unite move cooldown really just gives you one more time you're going to be using your Unite before Rayquaza. I think that's really nice for some of the later fights inside the game, or even some of the earlier ones if you're able to get your levels pretty fast. And the extra HP just lets you survive a little longer inside of combat, and it actually doesn't do too poorly into Pokemon like Mewtwo Y and Mewtwo X. So I think it's in a pretty decent position inside the game. Another one that's in a pretty good position is Garchomp. Even with items, you know, like the curse items, which we'll talk more about as this tier list goes on, even with things like curse items, I don't think Garchomp's lifesteal has been hurt enough to really, you know, destroy it or anything like that. Garchomp's been doing good for a while, and I think it's continuing to do very, very well. A Pokemon that no one talks about, but is still solid, is Machamp. I think Machamp is still super solid. Easy to secure wild Pokemon, easy to get your levels, easy to get your Unite move, and if you land it, you're really, really powerful. It's a really solid Pokemon, and it's been sitting in my A-ish tier for a while. And I think that's a reasonable place for Machamp to stay. Here's one that I'm raising up. I'm not sure how high yet, but it's going to be Charizard. Charizard with a Curse Bangle. It feels like it's truly the perfect item for Charizard. I love Charizard with this item right now. Muscle Band, Sculpt Lens, and now that third item, Curse Bangle. Basically, Charizard's Unite move is its basic attack. You know, it's that big Seismic Slam, and then right into flying through the air, using your basic attacks, constantly applying curse damage, stopping your opponents from, not curse damage, excuse me, curse debuffs, constantly attacking them with damage, even if they have a focus band, even if they're running to goal zones. Like, their healing is reduced a lot, and I've just been ripping through enemy teams with it. I might even say it could be higher, but it's very specific, and I want to see how things shake out more before I throw it a little higher on the list. Buzzwole, however, is, I think, one of the top all-rounders in the game. I've talked about this before. I think Buzzy Boy is just so incredibly good, takes a pretty high skill level, but once you understand the combo and the flow of this Pokemon, you see just how devastating this thing can be. Even to things like Mewtwo X and Y, I feel like the combos, the way you can position your enemies, like being able to just pick up Mewtwo Y and slam it back down onto your, you know, right into your team, it's very, very solid. A really, really good Pokemon. Dragonite. Dragonite, I feel like probably hangs out close to A. It's either A or B+. It's right in here. It might be closer to the B+ tier, but it's very, very close. I actually think Outrage plays really well into the meta. You're a little too squishy at times, but besides that, I think Outrage plays really well into this current meta. I'd say it probably hangs out somewhere in here. All of the all-rounders, for the most part, are doing pretty well. Here are a couple that I'm not really in love with, and that's Scizor. And I guess you could put Scyther right there, both into the B tier. Scyther, more of a speedster. It's fine. I mean, maybe it's a little better. Scizor, I think, in the meta where things are reducing sustain, and this Pokemon is all about sustain healing, I think it actually has gotten hurt once again. I think it might... I talk about Scizor too much, I think, but I think it might be one of the most overrated Pokemon in the game. It's not awful. It's fine. It just feels like it has to struggle with a lot inside this meta. I would like to try it with curse items a little bit more, because it does, you know, fight for a long period of time, so you actually could get some really cool stuff going on with it. But in general, I'm just really not in love with this Pokemon's position in the meta. Same thing with the Azumarill, a Pokemon that I really, really like, and I've had some great success with recently, but I also think it just doesn't fight that well into the meta. Sometimes it feels like it's just a little too slow. It's a little hard to get in on certain Pokemon, and even once you do, they can kind of get away from you, it feels like. And they, you know, they toned a few things down with it a little while back. I don't think they toned back Water Pulse's damage. It just feels like, I don't even know why they needed to do any of that. Fine, this Pokemon's doing fine. You can definitely still win with it, but I think a B tier is a fair place for it. Now we've got Urshifu. I think the Dark Bear is probably hanging out close to the A tier or so, maybe even A+. Dark Bear is still really good, and it has single target delete. It could probably be here in the A+ tier. I just think not a lot of people play this Pokemon right now, but it's still incredibly powerful. And then we have Water Bear. Water Bear is going to be my first S tier Pokemon of our tier list right here. I still think its level 5 is absolutely broken. I think it with curse items just lets you dive your opponents even better. I think Water Bear is crushing it. So good. Such a good Pokemon. probably the best level 5 in the game outside of Mewtwo now, just being able to Mega with basic attacks, right? But it might even still be better, honestly. It's incredibly good. It just has to get that level 5, which is why you probably want to play it in the central area. But there you go. Look at our all-rounders. I think all of them are doing pretty solid. They're all in kind of a close running with each other between sort of the B and the A plus tier right there. I don't think there are any that are so bad, especially after they buff Zarina. I don't think there are any that are so bad that you really cannot play with them. Let's start talking defenders right here with one that's really doing well right now, and that's Crustle. Crustle's buffs recently were great. It might even be higher, honestly. It might be an A plus tier choice inside this game. I'd have to think a little bit more about it, but Crustle is doing really, really well. In fact, hold on. You know what? I actually am going to move it up to the A plus tier. I thought this Pokemon was doing well. Its win rate also supports it. I didn't want to be too biased and just say just because I love Crustle, you know, and was so happy to see it buff that it was kind of moving up there. But I do think Crustle is doing very, very well. Its win rate supports it also. I'm going to move it up to our A plus tier. It's also a Pokemon that doesn't get hurt really by curse items. It doesn't have any self-sustain. So you're not really hurting it more by having a curse item on the enemy team than you would any other Pokemon. It also uses the items pretty well with Rock Tomb and Stealth Rock. It's just consistent with its Unite move and stuff. I'm loving Crustle right now, and it's hanging out in our A plus tier. Lapras S. Lapras is one of the best Pokemon inside the game. Still probably the best defender. It's right up there with a few of the top ones. Even though this is a sustain heavy monster and curse items affect it, Lapras is still incredibly good inside of Pokemon Unite and one of the best Pokemon inside the entire game for sure. Another really strong one that I undervalued a tier list or so back, is Blastoise. Blastoise is actually crushing it, and curse items work really well in the rapid spin build. It also got some interesting changes to its Surf Hydro Pump build. Now Surf kind of slides against objects. I'm not sure if that's going to be good, if that's going to be bad. Maybe that hurts it more than I would expect, but in general, I think Blastoise is actually doing really well inside the meta, better than I thought it was, and I do think this Pokemon is doing really great right now. Trevenant's another one that I put up into this A plus tier. It doesn't quite make it into S. It doesn't feel that broken, and I do think curse items might hurt this Pokemon more than some. This Pokemon takes a lot of damage, has multiple ways to recover, but now it's going to recover less, but it's still going to take the same amount of damage from its moves. I don't think that's going to make it unplayable, but I do think that's going to hurt Trevenant maybe more than a lot of Trevenant players expect. Here's a Pokemon that isn't hurt too bad by curse items and is still great. That's Slowbro. Slowbro has, I think, the only healing inside the game that is not affected by curse items. So its passive is not affected by curse items. It is the only Pokemon like that, I believe. There could be something else in the game that I'm not realizing, but Slowbro is still Slowbro. I do think Lapras outshines it, but it still has single target Unite move to shut down the most important Pokemon on the enemy team. It's still incredibly tanky. It still does a ton of damage. It's great. I think Slowbro is great. Another Pokemon that I don't think has been hurt too much is Umbreon. Umbreon is maybe the second best. It's like right in here. All these are right in here, and I'm not really ranking them against each other. I'm just kind of putting each category into a list essentially. So as you can see, like, we'll have all-rounders right here, speedsters, then all-rounders, then defenders. They're not ranked against each other necessarily inside here. They're just kind of in that strong tier. So I do think all these defenders are crushing it inside the game, doing really, really well. Umbreon is, I mean, if you had to, it's maybe something like that, but you get the idea. They are all top tier defenders inside the game. Mamoswine, really good. I'd say Mamoswine's probably A. Probably A tier. I don't think it's as good as our A plus. And this is where Pokemon in our A tier hang out. They're like really, really solid, but they're just like, there's not that one thing that makes them so good I have to put them up into our next tier right here. I think A is a really fair place for this Pokemon to hang out. Another Pokemon that I think is probably A, it might be A plus, is Goodra. I have to see how badly Goodra is going to be hurt by the sustain issues, because it's a Pokemon that has insane amounts of self-sustain, and curse items could affect this Pokemon really more than any other defender on this list. Maybe maybe Umbreon, maybe Trevenant are kind of in the same boat here, but I have to wonder if Gudra's going to be hurt more than others. I still think it's really, really great, really solid here. Another solid defender is Snorlax. I feel like B+ is a fair place to put this Pokemon. Coordinated in, 5-stat games, you might have a little more success with something like Snorlax than you would some of these other defenders, but this tier list is mostly for players who are not playing 5-stat coordinated, because 5-stat coordinated, 90% of the roster is irrelevant. So what does this matter? Our next Pokemon that's going into our C tier for weirdos is Greedent. I don't really know what to say about Greedent. I don't know what to do with a Pokemon like Greedent, and I sort of like talking like this, apparently, when I'm talking about Greedent. I like Greedent, and I don't think it's bad. And my C tier this week is for weirdos. It's just for Pokemon that I don't think are bad, but they feel a very awkward role on a team. They can still provide insane amounts of value. I was playing it the other day, winning some games with it, having a lot of fun, but it is such a weird spot in the game right now, and I don't think the meta has particularly helped our C tier for weirdos. So that's where I'm going to leave Greedent for the time being. In general, I think all the defenders are doing really, really well inside the game. There's not really a defender that I think is griefing your team or anything like that. I think they're all really, really strong picks, and a team without a defender is going to struggle. Let's head on over to our supporters next. Supporters are a category that you think would be hurt a lot by curse items, and I do think they've been toned down a little bit, but they're still incredibly impactful inside the game. Pokemon that I'm going to put up into our B+, it's either B or B+ is Wigglytuff. I don't really know where to put this Pokemon. It is good, and it's also not amazing. It's really good early, and its Unite move is also completely canceled by Umbreon. It's in such a weird spot. I don't know. It's kind of like it's B+, it's kind of B. It's fine. I think Wiggly could still use some sort of quality of life changes to make it a little better than some of these Pokemon, because it's essentially a defender, even though it is in our supporter category. Our next supporter, I'm just going to put him in the C tier for weirdos, and that's Sableye. There was word we were going to be getting some Sableye buffs. They were trying them out on the public test server. They haven't hit the game yet. Possibly with Blaziken's release, we may see something like that, but right now, we are not sure if that's going to be coming to the game anytime soon. Good Pokemon, does a lot when played well. When played poorly, this thing does nothing. And I really do think it hangs out in our C tier for weirdos, because I don't know what you do with this thing. I really don't. It's just, I don't know. It's so bizarre. It probably needs a buff, but it feels like balancing Sableye is like balancing a Speedster. It's so disruptive that if you make it too good, it's just, I don't know, it gets a little crazy here. And again, C tier this week, it doesn't even mean these Pokemon are awful. It just means I find their placement in the game just really hard to, it's really hard to pin down exactly what value you're going to be providing your team, especially when you're not playing in a coordinated setting with these. Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is probably hanging out in the B or the B+ tier. It also needs some buffs. However, I do think Curse Items with Power Swap actually works really, really well on Mime. I could be undervaluing Mime right now because of how good Curse Items work with this Pokemon. It could apply it with its Unite move, everyone it hits with Confusion or Psychic, or if you Power Swap an enemy, it's Constant Curse. I was using this earlier, really, really liked it, but I also think Mime is just so much weaker than it used to be, and a lot weaker than a lot of the meta right here. Now let's get into some of our supporters that are just crazy. Blissey. Blissey is probably the best supporter in the game, because even if its healing is reduced, you could run the Safeguard build. Safeguard Helping Hand and Mewtwo Y are kind of the new broken duo inside the game. It's the most broken supporter, and all supporters are really, really good. But I think Blissey's probably the most broken right now because it enables the most broken thing to be even more broken inside the game. Another supporter I've been putting in my S tier, and I'm not changing it this week, is going to be Eldegoss. I still think it's doing very, very well. Even though Pollen Puff's healing could be reduced a little bit, it still has a massive shield in Cotton Guard, and you can still you know, dominate your lane early with this Pokemon. It's just a great supporter. You can play it a lot of different ways, and all of them have a lot of very high success rate. And it's also really good for earlier players, like novice players in the game. I think it's one of the best Pokemon to pick up, and I still think it's doing very, very well. Hoopa's another one. Hoopa solo, I don't think you could put it into the S tier. I'd probably put it like A or B plus if you're only playing solo, because there are just times where your team is not going to listen to you. I think you could maybe even put it into our A plus tier right here. Coordinated, it probably jumps back into our S, but maybe into our A plus is a little more fair for something like Hoopa. I don't know though. It's still insanely good. Its Unite move's insanely good. It's hard to not even put into our, I might put into our S tier. I might change my mind. Clefable, I'm putting down into our A plus. It might be A, but I don't know. It has incredible counters to so many Pokemon. Like, when you look at Pokemon like Gengar, Zarina, who just got buffed, and you're going to see a lot of them inside games, and both of those Pokemon are devastated by something like Gravity. Even with curse items, this thing still heals a crazy amount to the entire team. I think supporters are just so good, and this Pokemon's so good. Do I put Comfey not in the S tier? Do curse items actually put this Pokemon one tier down? Part of me doesn't think so. This is a hopeful placement right here. I am hopeful that Comfey has been hurt enough by curse items that it is A plus tier, but you know what? It's probably in our S tier. It honestly is probably in our S tier. I don't know. I'm hoping that curse items puts this Pokemon down a tier. We're just going to have to see what that looks like. But there are supporters inside Unite. All of them are still really, really good. Just like a defender, a team without a supporter is going to be struggling in this meta. Okay, it is time for our attackers. Where do we want to start with our... You know what? Let's start with someone who got some nice buffs, and I think actually might be higher than a lot of people think. I'm going to put Pikachu into our A tier. It got multiple buffs to the Thunderbolt build, and it also got a huge buff, I think, with the curse items. I think curse items are great for a lot of the mages inside the game. You can apply your curse debuff to multiple opponents at range, and something I think a lot of people weren't trying with Pikachu was the Thunderbolt build to counter Mewtwo Y. You can actually play at enough range against Mewtwo Y with Pikachu to sort of stun it and shut it down and do a ton of damage to it and not be in that not be in a super vulnerable position yourself. I actually think it plays better into Mewtwo Y than things like Alolan Ninetales, even though Alolan Ninetales is still very, very good. I might even be underrating Pika, but to be fair, it's just really one moveset that got buffed, and curse items are great, but I don't know how much they're going to help the Electro Ball build. So for now, I'm going to put it up into our A tier, but man, Thunderbolt Pika with Curse Incense is so good. Okay. Now that we're talking about mage Pokemon, let's put more of them up here. Mew, I'm still going to put into our S tier. I always have a hard time deciding whether it's S or A+. The thing about this Pokemon is, in the right hands, it's one of the best things inside the game. Even after the nerfs it received, it's still one of the most valuable Pokemon you could have on a team. It's also incredibly difficult to shut down. I'm going to put it here into our S tier. It's an extremely high skill ceiling Pokemon, and if you're a high skill Mew, you are so incredibly good for your team. Another mage that I love right now, mage is kind of long range special attacker, doing area effect damage, stuff like that, is Chandelure. I think Chandelure's great. I think Curse Chandelure on Overheat's insane. You're just lobbing so much fire. The fire ticks reapplying the damage. Like, Shandy is, I think, doing so well with these changes. So do not sleep on this candle. It's very, very good. Also, blow out your candles before you go to bed. You don't want to set your house on fire. Let's talk about Alolan Ninetales. Is there a way that Alolan Ninetales is not A+? It's possible the nerfs have dropped it down to A, but this thing is so good. Blizzard Avalanche is still so good. I don't think it's S tier broken. I think lowering the cooldown has hurt it a little bit, but it is right here in this realm. I think it's probably still A+. I need to play it more after the nerfs to really see, but I don't think losing 1 second on its cooldown, while not being insignificant, 1 second can mean a huge difference in some of these fights. I don't think it's insignificant, but I also think this Pokemon is just so powerful right now that I still think it's doing just fine. I really do. Another mage style Pokemon, Espeon. Great. Espeon's great. A tier, I think, is super solid place to put this Pokemon. Both builds for it, I think, are strong. I was playing Stored Power Psybeam the other day, having so much fun. I also think it's a nice Pokemon for applying Curse as well. Psybeam hits multiple opponents. Psyshock can hit multiple opponents as well, and you can also just dance around with your stored power if you like. Your Unite move hits multiple enemies. I think Espeon, while not being the most broken thing in the game anymore, at one point Espeon was really broken as sort of an attacker. It's still really, really good. Another mage style Pokemon that I think is really solid is Gardevoir, very good. I don't know if you need to run curse items. Look, between you and me, I've just been running it on everything. I love them so much. I think they're so good. Guard does very well with them because you can apply it, area effect. Basically, all of the mages that do big, like, area bombs of damage have been doing really well with these items. When enemies are kind of running back to their bases, or their focus bands are proccing, or your team is moving into fight, they're just getting reduced healing from every source. And, some people have been critical of the curse items because they've said, yeah, well, what if there's not a healer on the enemy team? Even if there isn't, there are so many Pokemon that have internal healing, whether that's their, spell damage, special attack damage, at some point will start to give them HP back in a sort of spell vamp, or they have life steal on their basic attacks, or they use their goal zones, or they go to berries, or they have some internal healing in their kit. Like, there are so many Pokemon that are affected by these items, and they're just big chunks of attack and special attack too. So they're really, really solid. Another mage that I think is doing well, Delphox, and I might be undervaluing Delphox right here. I might be. The thing is, I can't tell if Delphox's Unite move, going from 50% to 80% healing reduction is massive, or if it already was just this massive field that you weren't trying to fight in anyway. It's hard to say. I think Delphox probably solo is maybe a little better, just because it has insane mobility and stuff like that. I like Delphox. I'm not absolutely in love with it, but I think it's a really, really strong mage. Hang out in the A tier. And again, maybe solo it could be high as A+, because this thing can get pretty nutty. And then we have kind of our weird sort of mage Pokemon, and I think they're all doing really well. Venusaur is probably A+ or A, somewhere in here. Petal Dance Giga Drain might have... I can't tell if it's been hurt so much by curse items, or the fact that you have a Petal Dance around you that is constantly applying curse is making you that much better. I'm going to put it into our A+ tier for now. I'm going to put Sylveon into our A tier. I think Sylveon's doing really well. I love Hyper Voice curse items. It's so good. It just shreds opponents down. They just don't expect it. And even when they run back to goal zone, they're just not even healing as much. It's so nice. I'm loving Sylvie right now. And then we have Glaceon that I'm also going to put into our A tier. It's a Pokemon that could be a little higher, but after its nerfs that it got a little while back, I think it's hanging solidly in the A tier. And what you're seeing in general with all of these sort of mage-style Pokemon, Slick Spoon is great for them. Curse items are great for them. And for the first time in a while, we have had multiple seasons and multiple metas where special attackers are doing really well. I don't know if you remember back before Slick Spoon, basically, we had special attackers just constantly getting rocked in this game. And I think they've finally kind of really found their home. There isn't really one of them at all that I would say is bad, especially after they're buffing kind of the Mage Pikachu here. Now let's talk about a what Pokemon on my list, and that's Cramorant. So Cram is good, really good, but Cram is kind of bugged right now where its damage on its dive, from what I understand, is not doing the kind of damage that it should. And it still hasn't gotten a buff to its mage style build in a while. It doesn't need a huge one, but even if it had a cooldown buff like some of these Pokemon, I think it would be in a more reasonable position. I have to put it into our what tier right now because I don't even think it's bad. I just think it's kind of bugged, and for the time being, it's just... What? What's going on with you? All right, here's a Pokemon that's in our S tier without question. Inteleon was already doing really well. except for Snipe Shot, was already doing really well. And now Liquidation has received a buff. He's great. Inteleon's great. And I don't think you need to feel bad playing Inteleon because there's Mewtwo Y. It's so much better. Inteleon is so good though. It is busted good. I love this Pokemon. I love playing it. Liquidation is crazy good. Snipe Shot's one of the funnest builds inside the game too. Although I think the variance on it's a little too high. And I think people like to show off with it more than they like to win with it. That being said, I think Inteleon is still crushing it inside the game. And now, before we get to Blaziken, we have sort of our 4 auto attackers in the game, and these are the Pokemon that I have the hardest time nailing down in this meta, and I've had the hardest time nailing them down in previous metas too. They're not really used in competitive at all, even though they're all still pretty good, and they're all way completely overshadowed by Mewtwo Y, who is an auto attacker that is way better than all of them. So it's a really weird group to categorize, but if I had to categorize them, I would put Greninja into our B tier, I'd put Cinderace into our B+, I'd probably put Dragapult right there with Cinderace, even though the curse items might have helped Dragapult more than most. I would keep Duraludon in our A tier, and I'd keep Decidueye in our A tier as well. The range from Spirit Shackle just puts Decidueye up into this tier because it can outrange essentially everything inside the game. Duraludon just can't. For as much as people maybe don't want to recognize it, it's just a Pokemon that doesn't lose that much. It doesn't lose as often as many. Its attack is crazy good, and its secure on objectives is still amazing. I think Dura is still doing really well. Cinderace and Dragapult both doing fine. I think Cinderace is actually its win rate is lower than its value, but it feels like, what if Mewtwo Y was not as good? Ding! Cinderace. So I think because of that, if someone was going to play Cinderace, they're just going to play Mewtwo Y and do so much better. Dragapult has great secure with its Unite move, and I think it actually plays pretty well into Mewtwo Y, but it is also weak Mewtwo Y. So I don't know what you do with that. And then we have Greninja. Greninja is one of the weirdest ones. I actually think Greninja needs a buff. If I wanted to just be harsh, I could say Greninja's down in like a D tier or something. I don't think it's necessarily that bad, but I do think it needs a buff. It doesn't feel like it can do his job as well as it used to be able to, especially into this meta. It really doesn't fight well into X. It really doesn't fight well into Y. And there's so many things like Urshifu can chase it down so easy. Zacian can chase it down. All of the speedsters can burst it. And I just think it's in one of the weirdest spots for an auto attacker inside the game. Now, let's talk about Blaziken. And you know what? I'll talk about Mimikyu as well really quick here. You never know what power level something's actually going to release at. Playing Buzzwole inside the test server, I thought it was going to be broken. And it wasn't. Playing Scissor, I thought it was going to be broken. It wasn't. And then you play something like Mewtwo X and Y and they felt fine, but then they are released inside the game and their power levels amped up and they're way broken. So it's really hard to say from a test server where a Pokemon's going to release, but playing around with Blaziken's kit and the power level it sits at right now, I do think it will be an S tier Pokemon inside this game. I think the way it plays, its ability to chase, its ability to fight, I think it's kind of like Urshifu in that sense. It does have to evolve multiple times, but I don't think it's going to be too hard to do that, and I think it will probably play the central area because of this. Again, all speculative, but I think you're going to see it in the S or A+ tier. I think it's going to be very good. And then Mimikyu, I wouldn't be surprised if you see something quite similar for this Pokemon. I was describing it as good Gengar almost on my public test server stream of it, and I think they've even talked about buffing. I think it's play rough and stuff like that, so I think you could see this Pokemon up in our A+ tier, or even, depending on how it releases, even into our S tier. A lot of new Pokemon inside of Pokemon Unite have been releasing very powerful lately, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see these two Pokemon release somewhere like this. As you can see, in my opinion, our tier list continues to shrink, and we have a lot of Pokemon that are very viable, but we have a lot of Pokemon that are very questionable as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? As always, be cool to each other, but I'd love to hear everyone talk and discuss where they think things are in the meta. This you know, meta is just shifting right now, so there are some things that I'm absolutely right about, and there are some things that I'm going to be wrong about. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you. I love you guys, and I will see you all next time. Nerf Mewtwo.